Hello and welcome. I'm DrHamfist, and we are taking a look at four new Witchwood cards, which hit the internet and sparked a lot of controversy, really. I think people are either quite for these cards, sort of seeing what Blizzard's vision is here, or very against them. And I kind of get both sides. We're going to address sort of the two different views that you can take here. All of these are relevant to the Baku and Greymane cards that we saw before that synergize with even or odd cost only decks that give you this super strong starting ability without you having to draw them. And then these cards, all four of them, have a sort of unique effect that's only true if you meet that same criterion, like one or the other. They're all class cards. And Blizzard's idea here is they're pushing the versions that they thought would see the least experimentation. So, for example, one of these that we're going to see, it's an Odd Mage. And the idea is Odd Mage looks bad before you give it a tool. So they gave it a tool. And then people are a little bit upset by these because they go into literally only one deck. So there's really only one way to use these cards. And some of these are printed at Epic. So that I do kind of get. We're going to go through these in order, and basically in order of how disappointed I am in them first. And then they get better moving on. So this first one here, I think this is probably the least exciting of them. This one here is actually for Druid. It's called Gloomstag. So it's a 5-drop. Would be a 2/6 beast, but it's got taunt, and then the battle cry is if your deck is only odd cost cards, get +2/+2. So in Odd Druid, this says 4/8 taunt beast. It's boring. Like, even when it's on, I mean, sure, a 4/8 taunt for 5's good. Historically, Druids have played 5-drop 4/6 taunts that had the option of being 4/4 charges. They've been like decent before. We don't really see those these days that often because Blizzard just has given better tools to Druid. Now, the +2 health is a big difference, so this will probably see play in Odd Druid. Another thing you have to keep in mind about these odd or even decks, if you only have half the mana slots available, at each individual slot you do have, there's going to be like roughly double the cards that fit. So, before it's like, well, Azure Drake takes up your 5 slot, but what other 5s can you really fit because you won't have that many 5s? Well, if you have no 4s or 6s, you'll have a lot more 5s than a normal deck would. So any of these cards that have this unique bonus, if you're making that deck, there's just no way you aren't including them. They're auto-includes, and then you've got your legendary that gives you the whole purpose of the deck, so those 3 slots are absolutely auto-includes. Now, that still leaves you 27 slots to make up the deck, so there's still a lot of customization you can put into there. I think it's kind of alright to print this card. The idea here is Odd Druid maybe wouldn't see any play without this, and then sort of the initial rebuttal is, why don't you just print strong Odd cards so that Odd Druid can use those? And the catch there is, if you print strong cards at Odd and Druid, people are going to take those and put them into normal Druid decks. And then normal Druid's going to be too strong, and still nobody's going to play Odd. We still have this problem. That doesn't get around the catch that this only fits into that deck specifically. So the question is, if we lose a whole card in the expansion, like this is one of what would probably be 2 epics for Druid in the expansion, is it worth us losing sort of, like a strong epic in general? For Druid in order to make Odd Druid potentially get off the ground. That's sort of the trade-off. I kind of think that's fine, but here is where I take real issue with this card. It's just a 4/8 taunt. Like, it doesn't do anything cool. Like, this battle cry, I mean, yeah, sure, I guess like it makes it particularly weak to silence, but this is just like a 4/8 card with taunt. It's boring. So that's sort of my main issue with this one. I definitely don't like Gloomstag. I mean, it's going to be powerful in Odd Druid. If Odd Druid ever sees play, this will see play. But it's just such a boring way to make Odd Druid better. Just give it a big beefy taunt for 5. I would have liked to have seen it do something differently. Maybe go revisit. Historically, we've seen that 3/9, I think it was, card that had... it had like super taunt in a sense. If your hero took damage, that minion took it for you instead. I think the main problem with that card, I forget the name of it too. Hopefully you know what I'm talking about. That card didn't have taunt, so they would just swing into your face to kill that minion. So all of their minions could damage that minion for free. If that minion also said taunt, it would have taunt. You couldn't swing face to damage it, but then like burn spells also would be blocked by that taunt too. So that would have been a lot cooler. I would have liked to have seen this be a card that said, you know, if your deck has only odd cost cards, this minion takes damage instead of your hero, or however to properly word that. But just have it always be printed at a reasonable stat line. Maybe something pretty wacky too, where it was more like a 2/12 minion. So not a lot of pressure, but if you can just guaranteed block 12 face damage with it, like only an odd druid, maybe that would see play. Something a little bit spicier than just a 4/8 taunt, right? Moving on, the next one, I guess Blizzard thinks that even Shaman wouldn't be particularly good. Given how bad Shaman is in general, I'd say that's a pretty fair wager. The other thing you have to think about in this context here, even or odd, which one's better, you kind of have to look at what the actual impact of the hero power upgrade is. Because you're either making the 2-power hero upgrade pretty crazy, or you're reducing the cost. So something to keep in mind here. In the late game, when you have 2 spare mana on every turn, you're way better off if you've upgraded your 2-cost hero power. If you reduce the hero power cost to 1, that's really only going to get you a ton of mileage in a sort of a tempo deck where you're looking to pressure board quickly. Late game, you'd be better off with, being able to consistently pay 2 for the larger effect every turn once you're just playing your top deck and your hero power every turn. So if we're going to see some sort of like tempo-y, reduce the hero power cost of Shaman deck, it's going to have to be able to, take board quickly and then pressure with the board quickly and possibly make some pretty good use out of those totems. This is definitely a strong tool that would do that. We've sort of seen almost this exact card in Secret Mage. The catch was that you could kind of turn it off by triggering their secrets early if you could do it. Whereas this, as long as they've constructed their deck correctly, there's no way to play around it and sort of turn it off. So it's just always going to be high value. And this is a very strong effect as far as gaining board. Shaman wants to hold board, then abuse their board, Bloodlust on an enormous board. Being able to ping something for 2, and then also having, the 2/3 having a bit higher health. It may be able to trade off another small minion and still stay alive. This is going to be a very strong tool. In fact, this actually might detract from some of the brilliance of the previous 2 legendaries. This, if you draw it in particular, is a very big power spike, which is sort of the nice thing we sort of avoided when we were looking at Baku and Greymane both having a start of combat or whatever it says, start of the game ability. This, it only matters if you draw it, so it does sort of have that Keleseth high rolliness to it. Now it's a 2 of, so it's not going to be as rare as Keleseth, but it's still going to feel a little bit bad when you're playing against a Shaman. They draw 2 of these, if you're actually seeing this on ladder ever. So I do like this one a little bit less just with how spiky it is and that it's coming down on turn 2 and it's such a blowout. But at least it's not just a big bag of stats, right? So that at least is a little bit better. And also as a side note, I believe all of these cards are excluded from Arena because you would never really be able to satisfy their criterion. So this is really constructed only we're looking at. And then probably standard only too. With standard having such a small card pool when this expansion comes out, I'd be surprised if much of these see any play in Wild. I'm sure maybe a few fringe ones would, but these even or odd decks are going to be a much bigger thing in standard, I would say, than Wild. Next, we've got Glitter Moth. Now this one I like a lot better. So a 5-drop 4/4 in Priest, and then if you have only odd, it doubles the health of your other minions. So this one's nice. It doesn't do anything, that totally blows you out when it's played, just like that Shaman one kind of does. It's also not just a big bag of stats like the Druid one. It helps if Priest already has a board, and that's sort of tough to do, but the payoff here is you double the health of your minions, and then in Even Priest, you can heal for 4 by paying 2. So you can really leverage that greater health pool that you're giving your minions, make some trades, then actually heal them up pretty quickly with that upgraded hero power. So I do like the flavor here, or at least like the design here. I don't think it's going to consistently work that well. Now, there are a lot of high health, good taunt minions at the odd costs for priests. So maybe you can kind of get this thing to work. I think if you're going second and coining out turn 4, it'll be a lot more consistent. But I think one of the challenges for these priest decks is going to be gaining the board when you have, half of your minions taken out of your pool. So I don't think this is going to be completely crazy power level. You basically can't make this work in an Inner Fire type combo list because you lose Divine Spirit at even. So I don't think there's any huge danger in printing this. Sort of the big drawback here is we're losing an epic for Priest that might have seen play otherwise, and possibly in multiple decks. Now, I think that complaint isn't hugely valid because there's plenty of epics that see play in no decks all the time. So maybe it's fine that we have, this attempt to make the worst decks in these even and odd formats actually exist, so you can actually birth a new deck by printing this card. I think it's probably fine. There's plenty of epics that just never saw play ever, and aren't even particularly fun and interesting. So if this one at least is, wacky and does something cool and possibly brings this new archetype up, I think it's still reasonable to print this. So I'm actually kind of happy with Glittermoth. I like it a lot better than the other two. And then here's my favorite, right? So Black Cat. This is very similar to Azure Drake. And I would in fact say, if you are looking at a card to include in Odd Mage, this is better than Azure Drake. We are basically losing 1/1 in stats, but discounting its cost by 2. So it's just crazy better than Azure Drake. Now, when you're going into Odd Mage, you're losing a lot of really powerful tools. So it's okay for them to have a huge payoff here. And the thing I like most about this one is it's almost acceptable outside of an odd deck, right? A 3-drop 3/3 with spell damage with a tribe. We've actually seen Soot Spewer before. Now, that didn't really see any play, but it was like an acceptable arena card back when it was actually available. These cards will not see any play in Arena, but I think what I would have rather seen Blizzard do is print all of these at such a line that they were kind of acceptable in just a normal deck, and they were available in Arena, and then for Constructed only, we had sort of this super interesting effect added on to it, such as that taunt taking damage rather than your hero or something like that. Obviously, just draw a card isn't like terribly interesting, but at least that keeps it from being like a world beater in Arena, right? If it basically would never have that in Arena, you could see cards that were printed at sort of 2 power levels, and the goal would be the initial power level would be just Arena sort of viable, fits into, you can draw it in Arena and not be, beating yourself for it. And then a pretty powerful one to sort of amp up specifically these odd or even decks that don't really work. I think I'm totally fine with this one. I think it would be pretty untenable to try to draw that very fine line on every single one of however many they're going to add, which is at least 4 we've already seen. So I get why they, didn't take that line. But if they found a way to do it, I think that would have been very slick, and I think people would have been much more receptive of these. And I also think if these were always printed at common, I think that would have done a lot. Because if you think about it, if these were in Arena, and we were going to be seeing these, and they were going to be somewhat weak in Arena because they always whiffed on there if your deck is odd or even, it's fine to have, sort of generally kind of okay cards printed for Arena at common. You're not really missing much from the set if a common is sort of kind of like a filler, right? Which we've seen plenty of, Worgen Greaser. And then if it had this sort of interesting constructive aspect where it's like, well, this can promote these archetypes that probably wouldn't see play without a tool, and you're only losing a common slot. Now, common, usually there's plenty of commons and some of them aren't that important, and you can you're okay with losing a common slot in your class for an expansion, whereas epic or rare, it's a bit more of a beating. So I think Black Cat was the best of these that I'm seeing, just in like the design side of it. I'm most happy about Black Cat. It seems super cool in Odd Mage, which I think it needs to, and it does. And it's basically sort of a nod to Azure Drake, having already been Hall of Famed and not seeing any play in Standard anymore. So I like this one very much. I'm not sure if we'll see any more of these. I kind of hope we don't, honestly, given some of the specifics of how it's taken, but I also think there is a bit of undue backlash. I think Blizzard could have done this better, but I think the primary objective is totally fine. If any new card that gets shown in this set breeds one new archetype that wouldn't have seen play without it, I think that card is still a success. And these are each an attempt to do that, and there's no way for Blizzard to know for sure, which ones will or won't pan out. But I think just the fact that these might produce a new deck type, I think is fine. The fact that they're immediate auto includes in those, so you have 3 solved cards in like Odd Mage, for example, I don't think that's that big of a problem. It's not like a totally perfect world, but I think just if they only rolled out Baku and Greymane, we wouldn't see any of certain ones, and that might be fine. I guess maybe that's my biggest complaint is maybe we'd be fine without there ever being an odd mage. But at the same time, what comes in the place of Black Cat? Does that actually make a new deck? Maybe it's fine to have these. I think I'm kind of in the middle territory on these, sort of between the controversy. I kind of see both sides of it. I don't think there's anything wrong with Blizzard printing these. I think they're reasonable. I do hope that the next cards that we see give me that same feeling I get when I first saw Baku and Greymane, where it was just brilliant. Like, those two are just done so well. These are support cards for those, and maybe make some new play, so maybe I'm actually fine with these. But I'd like to see cards that just on their own just are strikingly clever and brilliant when you sort of continue looking over them. So hopefully the next round of cards is going to be even more impressive. If you want to see those, feel free to subscribe. I'll show them, not in any sort of, instant news fashion. I'm probably going to put some thought into these before I throw them up, so they'll probably lag a bit behind the actual reveals. But I just want to talk to the design aspect of it, just my thoughts, and then whenever everything's out, I'll be doing a full set review at that point. And if you want to see my previous review of the spoilers on the last 6 cards and just the set in general, that's already up. So, feel free to stick around if you'd like to see some more. I'll be coming out whenever they show up, which I don't know exactly. I think it's going to be about a week before we see anything new. So, see you then.